All right, and welcome back to our game design 3D in Godot. And at the moment, here's what we've got. Really basic. I've got a tabletop. I've got three blocks here. They are rigid body, or sorry, they are rigid bodies, yes. So they behave naturally. I took away the crazy bounciness of that one just so we could play a little bit here on this one. But what I'd like to do is to start to put a player in here where we could perhaps move it around and maybe push these blocks around to create some kind of cool little um, game that a 2-year-old might be fascinated with, or perhaps somebody a bit older. Um, so at the moment here, we've just got these blocks here and this level one. And for the player, I'm going to do something a little bit different than I did before. I could add the player as a new node to this. However, the player is something that I'm going to reuse over and over again. And perhaps in building a game, I'm going to have level one, level two, level three. I'm going to want the player in each level, and that would mean having to copy and paste from one level to another um, when I made the player. And then also problematic would be every time I wanted to make a change to the player, I would have to update each one of those. I'd have to copy and paste from wherever I made a change to all of the other levels, to all of the other scenes, if you will. So I want to look at the idea of creating an object as a scene, and that's a really, really powerful idea, and is useful whenever you're going to either reuse an object or something over and over again, or you're going to have multiple of them in the same level. For instance, these blocks are copies of each other, but if I change one of these blocks, like made it exceptionally bouncy, it wouldn't affect these other ones. That's not very handy if I'm, say, creating a bunch of enemies. I had 10 enemies on there, and I decided I wanted to make an update to all of the enemies. I would have to manually go in and make the tweak to each individual enemy. These are all copies, but once they've been copied, they don't change. The power of a scene is I can have a scene, kind of like the master or the template, bring copies of it in here, and then in order to make a change to all of them, all I have to go do is change the original. So let's look at how to do this. So I'm going to create a new scene with this little plus button up here. And now I've just got that basic kind of scene as we did before. In this case, I'm going to make a player. So I don't want to use the 3D scene. I have a specific thing in mind. I'm going to add another node. And we talked last lesson about the different kinds of physics bodies. In this case, I want the player to be controlled totally by me and the keyboard. So I'm going to use something called a kinematic body. This is a physics body, which means it will bump into other things. It will be affected by um, stuff around it, but I get to control the movement. It's not naturally done. It's not using a complete physics engine like the rigid body. I get to decide when I press a keyboard key that something's going to happen to this. So I'm going to add a new kinematic body, and you can see it's got the little shape of a player to remind you this is a great thing for that. Notice the rigid body is like a bouncy ball because it's going to behave a lot like a bouncy ball. You don't have a lot of control over the bouncy ball. Um, so kinematic body comes up, and you should now be used to this process of probably three things whenever you're adding some kind of physics body. First of all, um, I changed the name, so I'm going to call this player. The error comes up is no configuration, no shape warning, which is pretty standard. So we're going to add to it, though, a mesh, so I know what shape it's going to be. In this case, the mesh instance gets added to the player, and still the warning here because that shape hasn't been added on there, but I don't get to see my player until I put a mesh on there. In this case, I would like, I think maybe a ball or something, something I could roll around and be as a player rather than a cube. But you could choose a capsule or something like that in the future. But let's stick with the sphere for now. So I'm going to make a new sphere mesh. And if I zoom out, you can see there is my sphere indeed. And I've still got that error there, so I need to, of course, add a collision shape to my sphere, and then I need to pick a shape. Now, for the time being, I'm going to use a sphere shape to match my sphere. Although later on in a game we're going to design, you're going to see that the sphere is not necessarily the best shape, even though that's the appearance of it. Because it's going to be quite natural, it makes it really easy to roll over things that you might not want to roll over. But for now, let's pick that sphere shape. I'm going to make a new sphere, and you can see that it is this blue area in there. Oh, hit everything there. So I now have my sphere, all my errors have gone away, and I am just going to save this scene. Notice it automatically calls player because I smartly named it right away. People have asked me in the past, should I name the mesh instance and the collision shape? Probably a good idea, especially if you're going to have multiple things here. But for the most part, the mesh and the collision are hidden underneath the player, so I'm not going to name them, although for most things I do want to have a name, and I may go back if I added something else to this player, like a second collision shape, like I had a different head area or arm area or body area, or multiple meshes on this, then I would definitely want to name those. But I'm going to give it a go for now because I don't think adding sphere is going to be very useful. Now, same idea. If I were to play this scene right now, um, that's the player. I don't get to see anything because there's no camera on this player, so which I may move or change a little bit later. But I don't get to see it, nor do I really want to see the player here. I want to see the player on my level 1. I want to bring this player object in there. And the reason I've saved it as something separate is it makes it really easy to put it into every single level in my game. So let's move on to that step. And how we do it is, if I were to add a new node, that's going to create a brand new node. Well, I already have a collection of nodes I want to add to my level 1. And that is where we get this second little button up here. Instead of adding a brand new node, I want to, and it's a pretty long, ugly phrase here, instance a child scene. And so if you see what the message says is instance a scene file as a node. And so basically what it's saying is I have a scene, it's a collection. I'm going to bring it in as if it's its own special node. And notice it's kind of like a chain, so it's linked, which is the cool idea here, is that I bring not even a copy, I bring something in here and I know that it's part of this scene. And the cool part is if I change this scene, the player scene at any point in time, any place where I have linked it or brought it in will also be updated. So I'm going to click that here, and basically it says, well, here's a list of all the scenes you can bring in. I'm going to bring in the player and open that up there, and you can see there's my little player button, or my little player icon. I know that it's a kinematic body because it's got that little person here, and I also know that it is from a different scene. It's been brought in as a scene because I get this little clacker board. You can see there when I play a scene, there's that icon as well. So if I want, it is now part of this game, and I can bring it up here and move it over, and you can see how it works there. If I did want to edit it, I could either edit it here, or if I just click on this open in editor, it'll bring me into my player scene where I could make a change if I wished. So let's have a look. I've just put this player down here. Maybe I'll put it down on I don't want to go into the floor, but I'll put it right there so it's kind of sitting on the floor there. And if I were to play my game now, I've got this ball player here. You'll notice I don't have any control. It doesn't do anything. So let's add that functionality to my player. And that's the nice part. I can go into my player and I'm going to make some tweaks and changes here so that I can actually start to control this. Now, this is where your programming comes in. You get to decide how this works. But in order to do that, we need to add some programming to the player object. It's already got some programming in, as we've seen, some of the basic stuff. where notice it sits there, doesn't move, and with the blocks there, they fell down to the ground. That programming was already built into this kind of node, but now I get to add layers on of my own programming to make some customization. So to add a script or a program to a particular node, we can just add this little attach a new or existing script to the selected node. So I want to control the player, so I'm going to click on that and click that little plus. And up will come a little thing here. If you've done it before in the 2D, you'll see it's very, very similar. Here we get to choose some different languages. We're going to choose the GD script, which is basically pretty close to Python. So there's a few little tweaks in there. It inherits. This is an important thing. Basically saying what code or what script are we going to base this off of, and which means there's already a ton of programming in Kinematic Body, which means I'll have access to anything that a Kinematic Body can do in my code. I'm going to use the default template for now, and notice the path is just being named the player.gd. This is the script for the player object. And I'm just going to hit create here, and you'll see up comes a kind of programming interface very similar to what you did in Python. It's already got a few bits of code here just as hints to show you if you're brand new. You can get rid of these if you want. Notice they've got hashtags, which means they're commented out. There is really just one thing you absolutely must keep. You must keep this extends kinematic body, which means it's basically all scripts need to know where they're based from. So this is saying, hey, I am getting all of the bits from a kinematic body. It's kind of like when we said import math in our Python library or import something. It's basically saying this gets all of the stuff from that library. So a couple little extra things here in the hashtags or that are comments, just so you can see a little bit of difference. Notice here in Python, we would be able to make a variable just say a equals 2 or b equals text. That's very similar. In GD script, we have a requirement that you have to put the word var in front. And that is a nice feature actually that they've added. It's very common in a lot of languages that you can't just say, student equals Jeff, because a really common problem in Python is, let's say I wanted to update student and change it later on to the name Bob. This would be perfectly fine in Python if I were to typing that in. However, and I were to later on say print out student, and I might expect Bob, I would actually get the word Jeff to come out. And you can see what I've done here is I have actually made a spelling mistake. So I've created a new variable called studnet instead of updating the variable called student as I expected to do. So this is kind of a poor feature of Python as far as programming, because you can really easily introduce mistakes. Whereas if you have to, at least at the beginning of your code at some point in time, say, hey, I am making a new variable var student, and it's called Jeff. Later on, if I were to put studnet, it will give me this error saying, I don't know what this is. You've never told me that there's a variable called studnet before. So it's a little bit of a saving grace there. So that's required. This part is the only part required. We can get rid of this now that we know how to make variables. There is two little features here. A function ready and a function called process. This is a little bit different as well. When you are using functions or making new functions, you use the func there. And there are some built-in ones. All the built-in ones let you know they're built in with this little underscore at the beginning. So we have two functions that are usually run. The first one's called ready. This happens once at the beginning whenever an object is created. And then as far as a physics object, which is like the physics kinematic body here, we have another one called physics process delta. So I'll get rid of this one too here. This one happens over and over and over again. So I actually don't need any of these things at the moment. I might bring them in a little bit later, but we are going to make a player that we can move around. And the first thing I want to do is to set a variable in order to control the movement. So I'm going to make a new variable. I'll call it var movement. And it equals a special kind of variable in Godot. And so far, you may have often worked with X's and Y's, and if you've done any game design in 2D before, you'll know that we often move, say, this way and this way for our X and our Y. In a 2D top-down kind of game, this is great, or even a side-to-side, we would jump by changing the Y value, we would move left and right by changing the X value. Or a top-down, we would move left and right with X, and we would change Y to move up and down. Well, we are working with a 3D game here, so in fact, there is a third possibility, which is basically coming out of the screen, like so, and we would call this the Z movement. So in a lot of game design, we just change X and change Y. Godot has kind of mashed this in from last year to something called a vector 2, or a two-dimensional vector, just basically moving in the X and in the Y. Well, in the 3D, we have, of course, the ability to move up and down as well, or in and out from the page. So that is a vector 3 that we're going to create. And really, it's just a nice little package to be able to take all three values to move and put them in as one variable. So let's try this here. So this movement variable at the beginning, as I said, is going to be a vector 3. And as you see, I start typing it, it comes up for me. And a vector 3 really just is said, it's like a list almost. It's a package that contains an X, a Y, and a Z for us. So at the beginning, I don't want any movement here, 0, 0, 0. It's not going to move in the X direction, it's not going to move in the Y, and it's not going to move in the Z direction. But we will tweak that in a second. So now I could give this ball a little bit of movement, and in order to do that, we use the function, something called physics, physics process delta. Think of this as your game loop. Essentially, it's like a while loop, which means it keeps happening over and over and over again. As far as Godot goes, I believe it's 60 times a second. So it's really, really fast, whipping around, executing the code as you want. And it's great for any kind of game or movement because it keeps happening over and over again. In this case, I want to move my player, and we have a function that makes that movement happen. It's called move and slide. There are other movements that are available to us, but this is the one I want to work with right now. Now, the move and slide function basically does exactly what it says. It moves or slides a physics body around. And notice it takes, as this little hint comes up here, it takes a vector 3. So it wants some vector movement. So I can actually just type in movement here, which means it's going to move 0 in the X, 0 in the Y, 0 in the Z direction when I get going. And if I save this, we should be able to see that run. I'm going to go back to my level 1 and just hit the play scene. And you can see, yeah, nothing happens. Not very exciting. It is moving currently 0, 0, 0. However, I wanted to show you here why this variable is kind of handy here, because now I could change either the X, Y, or Z portion of this in order to actually make some movement. So let's say I want to move in the X direction. I can say movement period X. I get to change either one of those. These are actually named X, Y, and Z. I'm going to make it equal to 5, let's say. And if I run this now, it's going to change that X value and then make that happen. Let's see what goes on. And you can see, we get this little plowing thing here, bulldozing over, and it's constantly moving over in that direction. Fabulous. You could see we could tweak this here. What if I'm changed in the Z direction and we were to run that? Then we're going to make it move this way, Z in the positive. We could also move it the other way. If we make it negative, it's going to move Z in the negative direction. And you can see that when you look at, there we go, pushing up that way. If you go to your level 1 and you switch to the 3D view, here you can see up in the corner there, you can kind of see the positive direction is the way it's pointing. That'd be positive Z, that'd be positive Y, so the opposite direction of that. So this would be positive here, that direction would be negative. So it will be handy, depending how you've spun around, to know which direction is positive, negative. Sometimes you just have to test them out at the beginning. So we can play that. We could similarly also go in the, that's up there. Similarly, if I wanted to, I can now notice here, I've got a little script because it's been attached to the player, so I can very quickly access that script by clicking there. I could also, if I want to go into the Y value, let's go positive Y and play the scene, and you're gonna see that the little guy just kind of levitates up there. So there's our basic kind of movement around there. Now, this is not very useful because I want to have control over the player's movement. So that allows us to move into how do we get some input from the keyboard. And you may remember in Python, we used a input equals. This allowed us to get user input. Well, we have something similar to that in Godot, which is basically we grab input and there are some, I could put in the keyboard commands here, but Godot really has set it up nicely for us to be able to use these different things called actions, and actions are the ability to kind of assign characters to either keyboards, but you may also have mice. You may also have, say, something on a touch screen for a mobile phone, or even later on, you may want to push this out to your Xbox or have a joystick, or the Nintendo Switch where you're using the Joy-Cons. One of the powerful parts about Godot is that you get to build your game once and push it out to all sorts of devices. And for that functionality to work nicely, rather than having, maybe I want the arrow keys, but then if I'm a lefty, I might want WASD, or if I'm on the Joy-Con, I might want to use the up arrow or a different button. We actually can kind of pull it out of hard coding things and have what's called actions or on the input map. And you will find this under the project settings up here. We have something called an input map, and there is a whole pile of these pre-done ones here that say in the next version are actually going to get hidden for user interface, or basically just general stuff for moving around menus and things. But in general, we want to make our own actions, and you can see here we've got an action window. We can look through and find them, but I would like to make my own action here. So I'm going to use the up action, and I'm going to add it to my input map. So you can see now I've got my own little up action here. And what I get to do is assign keyboard controls to this, or multiple different things, which would indicate up. And to do that, I hit the little plus here. And notice I get a bunch of options that pop up here. I can use a physical key, I can use a key, I can use a joy button, I can use joystick accesses, I can even use the mouse button. So you get to design for everything, and you can have multiple different things. So in this case here, I'm going to use a physical key, and it just says which key do you want to press, and to move up, I'm going to press the up arrow. And actually, I'm going to undo that because this is a new feature of Godot. We've got the physical key. I'm actually going to make a key. My mistake. Up arrow there. And oh, I'm able to reorder these as well. There's my up. Now, the nice part about this as well is I don't just have the up arrow mean up. I could also make it work for lefties as well. So I'm going to choose another key and I'm going to press W to make that go up as well. So now up will be triggered by either the up arrow or the W. And to save myself some time, I'm just going to quickly move a down, add that, go with the down arrow and the add a key S. And you'll probably want to throw the left and the right in there as well. A, and I'm going to add the left arrow like so, and right. I'm going to add that one, add the D key, and add the right arrow. And there we go. Now I've built my own little up, down, left, and right, and I get to choose whatever I like. Could be numpads, could be a joystick, could be all sorts of different things there. So the nice part now is that's been memorized, and I can say up, down, left, or right at any point in time, and it knows that I'm talking about any of those keys. So what I want to know here is I want to change this movement, and I want to change it if I'm pressing one of those keys. So I use, just like in Python, if, and here's the function here, input dot is action pressed. It's gonna help me out here. So this is kind of like my function. It lets me know if I have pressed one of those keys, and that's grabbing input. And in this case, let's move the up and down. So I'm going to say if the action was up, and you can see up has now been remembered by the computer. Then I want to change my movement variable in the up direction. So I got to think about this. Might have to go back here and say, well, what is moving up? Well, my camera's here. So moving up would actually be, it looks like this would be positive Z. So this would be a negative Z movement. So let's try that back into my script here. So my Z movement is going to be, I'll make it -5. And let's try and see if that actually works. So if I pressed up, I want to change that variable like I did before. So let's play my scene, see if it works. I press the up arrow, and yes, indeed. And now you notice I actually keep on going. It does not change. It goes over and over and over again until the end of time. So I need to make a few tweaks here. First of all, let's steal this idea, and I'm just going to copy that and say, well, let's switch this to down. Then I would like to move in the positive Z direction. So now I should have a little more control over this scene. I can move down and up. I am now infinitely doing that, but we can also pull some left and right in here, and let's see if we can actually start to push these things around. So I'm going to steal both of these, and let's make that a left and make that a right. Then I'm moving in the X direction. I'm just going to take a guess here and see if I get it right. So I'm going to make X here, and I'm presuming left is negative, and I'm presuming right is positive, depending on how my orientation is. But I may have to come back and change that. Let's see here if it works. Right does move right, and left moves left. Perfect. And now I've got this ability to move in all directions. And you can see I can also nicely push things around. It's kind of cool. Push things off here, and this would be a bit of a fun game. You could make some kind of clearing game where you had to clear everything off. It's very satisfying actually. You'll notice I do continue to float off the edge of the world, but we can fix that later on. Also that I don't have the ability to stop moving. And I'm always moving at an angle because I'm either moving up or down, left or right simultaneously. So let's tweak that in my code as well. And this is going back to some stuff you did in grade 10 probably, because I have a couple options. I either want to move up, down, or I want to be stopped in that orientation. So what I'm going to do is throw an else statement in here and say, well, if I'm not pressing up or down, I would like my movement.z to be 0. And remember, these are an either or when you have an else. So I can't just leave it like that, because that means if I press up, I'm pressing up. And if I'm not pressing down, then it's going to stop. But I want these three to be kind of chained together. And you may remember that we have this nice statement called an elif statement, which is going to make these three things all as a group. So either I'm pressing up or I'm pressing down, and if I'm not pressing either of those, then I should be stopped. I can do the same over here with my left and right. I can say else movement dot x equals 0, and I'll throw an else if there. So also these three are now kind of grouped or chained together. Either I'm moving left or I'm moving right, and if I'm not moving either of those, then I am stopped in that direction. And that should give us a little bit more control over our movement of our player. So let's have a look at that. So I'm stopped. I'm now able to move up, which is nice. I'm able to move down and let go and stop. I'm also able to move right and left, and I can actually move at an angle too if I want by pressing down 2 different keys. And now you've got a fully controlled player that you can move around, and you can actually, whoa, grab him and do things. You could build, I don't know, some kind of Minecrafty type game here just by moving stuff around in a 2-dimensional world if you had enough of these blocks, or push things off the edge. So there is our basics of movement. I'll look at some better ways and some other things we can do in our next lesson, but now you've been able to create a kinematic body 2D. You can attach a script to it and move things around, and you're able to manipulate objects like that. Of course, we still are able to float off the edge of our world, and there's lots of other things we can add to make this a much more interesting game.